Hello, and thank you for coming along once again. Today we're going to look at an article to begin with and then a larger problem. The article is entitled No Soil, No Growing Seasons, Just Add Water and Technology. It's an article that appeared in the New York Times, and you can get ready access to it. So we're going to look at the recent evolution of hydroponics and agricultural technology in general, as well as the tragic trajectory of the world food system. These things are related and need to be looked at together, the recent evolution and tragic trajectory of the world food system. Another report issued this month indicated that with less than a decade to 2030, the world is not on track to ending world hunger and malnutrition. And in the case of world hunger, we are moving in the wrong direction. This is a report issued by the UN, known as the SOPHI report. It's come out annually for more than 5 years now. And this is the latest one in July of 2021. So first, let's have a look at the recent evolution of technology of food production through this New York Times article published on the 6th of July. This is the evolution of food production, at least in some parts of the world, as we'll see. We're going to have a look at this New York Times article. You can find it easily enough by going to Transition Studies and just putting in the title of the article you're searching for. Transition Studies is the research platform you can use to get at primary material. And if you look to the search site box, it's a search site engine, you can put in the words in the title, no soil. And since there aren't many articles with that in the title, we can just say go. And sure enough, you get the title printed here. And if you tap on that, you get access to the summary of the material. You can enlarge it if you want, and then tap the picture, and then you'll get out to the New York Times article itself, which is extraordinary. We're told no soil, no growing seasons, just add water and technology. And the subtitle indicates a new breed of hydroponic farm, huge and high-tech, is popping up in indoor spaces all over America, drawing celebrity investors and critics. Well, I'd urge you to read this article by Kim Severson. It was written on the 6th of July, and it's up to date. It's looking at the inside of one of these agro-tech industry installations in Moorhead, Kentucky. As she says, inside, without a teaspoon of soil, nearly 3 million pounds of beefsteak tomatoes grow on 45 feet high vines whose roots are bathed in nutrient-enhanced rainwater. Other vines hold thousands of small, juicy snacking tomatoes with enough tang to impress Martha Stewart, who is on the board of App Harvest, a startup that harvested its first crop here in January 2021 and plans to open 11 more indoor farms in Appalachia by 2025. This is clearly the development of high-tech agriculture in a large scale in the United States. You can scroll down and see the pretty pictures taken by the New York Times Photographer Luke Sharratt, including this one, which indicates in its subtitle here, the tomatoes at App Harvest were delicious enough to attract an investment from Martha Stewart. Go back up to the top if you like and take a look at what's involved with these photographs provided as part of the article. You can zoom in on them and see, in fact, that even in the midst of a pandemic, with people wearing masks and some not wearing them, you have the full-scale activity of a new kind of farm worker who works in an enclosed environment with not a teaspoon of topsoil, alongside these 45-foot high racks where vines work their way up and roots are bathed in a nutrient-rich cycle of rainwater that's provided for them in order to grow hydroponically. These tomatoes, when red, are harvested and packaged and sent off to, among other places, retail outlets like Whole Foods. All of this, we're told, is part of the new breed of hydroponic farm. Take a look, read the article in its full length and in detail for all of the implications that it represents in the transformation of high-tech agriculture. So, as the article tells us, no soil, no growing seasons, just add water and technology. The accompanying photos are quite impressive. The tomatoes at App Harvest were delicious enough to attract an investment from Martha Stewart. This is the newspaper that advertises. It gives you all the news that's fit to print. And apparently it thinks this is fit to print. What's fascinating is that it's focusing on a new breed of hydroponic farm, huge and high-tech. It's popping up in indoor spaces all over America, drawing celebrity investors and critics, as the article points out. But the article doesn't spend much time on the critics. We'll want to look a little bit at the critics to give you a sense of what's problematic about this kind of farming, especially when it calls itself organic. The question's been raised in articles that you can follow again through transition studies, like this one. Are hydroponics watering down organic food standards?
On the line with us is Lisa Stokey. She is the founder and executive director of Next 7 and co-director of Food Democracy Now. Next7.org is the website. And Lisa, and you can tweet Lisa at Lisa_STOKKE. Lisa, welcome to the program.
Hi, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. So the Food and Drug Administration has and correct me, in fact, jump in and interrupt me if at any point if I get any of this wrong.
USDA.
The USDA. Okay, thank you.
Yes,
the USDA established standards for what is organic. If you want to label something as organic, it's got to be made, grown, produced, whatever, in a certain way, and they want to extend those standards to things that are produced hydroponically. Why is that a bad idea?
Well, I tell you what, those that would like to have hydroponic certified organic have done a really good job at trying to confuse the issue. But, for myself and, other advocates and certainly, long-time pioneering organic farmers who helped to write the standards and have been farming organically for decades are really super clear, that organic has always been in the soil. Nurturing the soil, building the soil, growing in the soil has always been a foundation of organic agriculture. And so, just looking at that, simple aspect of it, right, that soil is foundational, hydroponic doesn't really fit in with that, right? Because, a plant is getting its nutrients from a nutrient solution and not from, the rich, fertile soil that organic farmers build. And so sadly, we had that vote last week and we lost that vote, that our National Organic Standards Board could not agree that the foundation of organic is in the soil. And so, a lot of organic farmers around the country today are really finding themselves in a very unique and situation, I would say. And USDA has proven itself to not be a good partner for farmers.
So, okay, so with soil, let's define terms here. Dirt is ground up rock. Soil is ground up rock combined with massive amounts of organic material and living organisms, literally billions of living organisms per teaspoon. That is soil, and all those living organisms interact with things growing in that soil to transport nutrients, for example. You see, fungi performing this, bacteria performing that function. All of that goes away when you do something hydroponically. You're just delivering, water and nutrients directly to the roots of the plant, without the benefit of assistance by fungi and bacteria and viruses or whatever.
That's
so you've got
right,
that, number one. And number two, typically in hydroponic, at least the hydroponic operations that I've seen over the years, there's a lot of plastic piping and plastic tubing, and this soft plastic releases estrogen mimicking chemicals. So I don't, unless you're going to do hydroponic gardening with stainless steel pipes or water pipes, I mean literally, glass pipes to carry the water that are not, reactive with the water. I don't see how could you call that organic?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're 100% right. You're spot on. And, this is the question, that we've been raising as well at next7.org. And maybe you saw our emails that we put out. And, in 48 hours before the meeting, I got almost 100,000 people, to sign on to this and say that just exactly what you're saying, that butter lettuce grown, floating in styrofoam, in water, in a nutrient solution, and plastic tubing with phthalates, just like what you were saying, that we know to be harmful, right? Endocrine disrupting chemicals. That's not organic. And, and you're 100% right. And like I said, it's really a disturbing situation that we're in, because millions of consumers, people, citizens rely upon, the organic label. And it just isn't, it's just the shadow, of what it used to be. And organic is now a victim of its own success.
Right. So basically what you've got now are companies that have figured out using hydroponic technologies, they can grow more food faster without the need for farms, without the need for as much dirt or soil.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say you're touching on that there, that it's just another, avenue for consolidation in our food industry, right?
Right.
I mean, this is like the new CAFO, confined animal feeding operation, and GMO model, that they have now implemented here. And you're right. I mean, the people that have invested in hydroponic and are looking to have it certified as organic are people like who? Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, who just bought Whole Foods. And yes, they can have higher profit margins when they are growing food hydroponically, right? As opposed to paying, and supporting.
Does Whole Foods produce
farmers.
does Whole Foods produce any of their own food? I thought they were just a retailer.
What is happening now, and this is still emerging, right? Because that sale, of Whole Foods to Amazon is still pretty fresh, right?
Right.
Pretty recent. But there are stories, in TechCrunch, there's a story that came out a few months ago about how Jeff Bezos and Eric Schmidt of Amazon and Google, respectively, have invested in a company called Plenty. Plenty is a hydroponic operation. The Plenty representatives and lobbyists were crawling at the meeting last week, the National Organic Standards Board meeting. As these meetings are, it's a lot of industry folks that show up and try to convince, the National Organic Program, the National Organic Standards Board, to, allow things into the organic program that really, quite frankly, don't belong, that are not organic.
Yeah.
And so this is, no pun intended, but this is really a watering down, of the organic standards in a very significant way.
There are other problems as well with the recent evolution of hydroponics and high-tech agriculture. And they're linked to the tragic trajectory of the world food system as a whole. This is what we want to turn our attention to in the same month as the article was produced in the New York Times, the 6th of July. Less than a week later, the UN published on the 12th of July the Food Security and Nutrition Report, known initially as SOFI, for the Security of Food International, for the Security of Food Insecurity, the State of Food Insecurity was its initial title back in 2015 when it began. Each year since, the State of Food Insecurity has been expanded in its scope, in its cooperating institutions, and in its warnings, which have been very severe in the last several years. The cooperating institutions include FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, IFAD, or IFAD, International Fund for Agricultural Development, UNICEF, the World Food Program, and the World Health Organization. An extraordinary array of UN agencies working together to produce a joint report. In fact, there have been several years of these SOFI reports, as they're referred to. State of Food Insecurity, as it was first referred to. It's been expanded to include nutrition in 2019 and 2020, and the latest one came out in July, the 12th of July, less than a week later than the New York Times article on hydroponic agriculture. Let's just look at the one the UN put together with all of these agencies, published on the 12th of July.
Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the world was not on track to end world hunger and malnutrition in all its forms by 2030. Under the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic, up to 161 million more people were facing hunger in 2020 than in 2019. New figures estimate that between 720 and 811 million people around the world faced hunger in 2020. The prevalence of undernourishment increased this past year to reach a level of 9.9%. Around 660 million people may still face hunger in 2030, in part due to lasting effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on global food security. This represents 30 million more people than in a scenario in which the pandemic had not occurred. More than half the world's undernourished are found in Asia. An additional 1/3 reside in Africa. Globally, 2.37 billion people did not have access to adequate food in 2020, an increase of nearly 320 million people in 1 year. Globally, malnutrition in all its forms also remains a challenge. In 2020, 149.2 million children under age 5, or 22%, were affected by stunting and 6.7% suffered from wasting. The actual figures are expected to be higher due to the effects of COVID-19. 38.9 million children under 5, or 5.7%, are overweight. In 2019, the high cost of healthy diets combined with income inequality caused healthy diets to be too expensive for around 3 billion people, a number expected to increase for 2020. In this environment, food systems transformations aimed at bolstering food security and nutrition are more important than ever before. Major drivers negatively affecting food security and nutrition include conflict, climate variability and extremes, and economic slowdowns and downturns. When food systems transformations focus on fostering greater resilience to these drivers, food systems can better provide affordable and healthy diets that are sustainable and inclusive. 6 transformation pathways, tailored to their specific context, will help us emerge from the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic. And such a transformation can be a powerful driving force towards ending hunger, food insecurity and malnutrition in all its forms for all.
That then was the Sophie Summary Report. But the Sophie Summary Report, coming out annually, is not the only UN agency working on these things very urgently. In fact, several months ago, less than 3 months ago, in April of 2021, David Beasley, Executive Director of the World Food Programme, addressed the UN Security Council by way of a Zoom call, warning of a global hunger pandemic. It's worth listening to his words in detail and the tone of his delivery. This is not a casual report or a statistical summary. He's aware of these things and in fact mobilizes them very effectively, but he's speaking with a tone of urgency that's rare in diplomatic circles. Let's listen.
Thank you for the opportunity to brief the Security Council today on this very, very important issue. And forgive me for speaking bluntly, but I'd like to lay out for you very clearly what the world is facing at this very moment. At the same time, while we're dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, we're also on the brink of a hunger pandemic. In my conversations with world leaders over the past many months, before the coronavirus even became an issue, I was saying that 2020 would be facing the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II for a variety of reasons, such as the war in Syria, Yemen, the deepening crisis in places like South Sudan, and as John Eglin, I know, will no doubt set out about Burkina Faso in the central Sahel region, the desert locust swarms in Africa, as the Director General Chu highlighted in his remarks, and more frequent natural disasters and changing weather patterns that we're experiencing. The economic crisis in Lebanon, which is impacting millions of Syrian refugees, DRC, Sudan, Ethiopia, and the list goes on. We're already facing a perfect storm. So today with COVID-19, I want to stress that we're not only facing a global health pandemic, but also a global humanitarian catastrophe. Millions of civilians living in conflict-scarred nations, including many women and children, face being pushed to the brink of starvation, with the specter of famine a very real and dangerous possibility. This might sound truly shocking, but let me give you just some numbers. 821 million people go to bed hungry every night all over the world, chronically hungry. And as Dr. Chu just pointed out, as the new global report on food crisis that's published today shows, there are a further 135 million people facing crisis levels of hunger or worse. That means 135 million people on Earth are marching toward the brink of starvation.
Thank you very much. What we've been hearing is how the system actually works right now. And I want to emphasize we have a world food system. It's based on large multinational companies. It's based on private profits. It's based on a very, very low measure of international transfers to help poor people, sometimes none at all. It's based on extreme irresponsibility of powerful countries with regard to the environment. And it's based on a radical denial of rights of poor people, as we just heard. It's interesting, we heard from the Minister of DRC, what's wrong with your country? Well, we don't even start by saying the King of Belgium created a slave colony for 30 years. The government of Belgium ran the slave colony for another 40 years. The CIA assassinated your first popular leader, Mr. Lumumba, and then installed another dictatorship for the next 30 years. And then Glencore and others now suck out your cobalt without giving you tax income. We don't reflect on that. We say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you govern properly? And so we have a system, but we need a different system. We cannot turn this over to the private sector. We already did about 100 years ago. Not only to the private sector with the US military behind it, with the defense of these property rights in the Minister of Honduras's country, where United Fruit ran the country for a long time. And their attorney was the foreign minister of the United States, Secretary Dulles, and his brother was the head of the CIA and overthrew the next door neighbor, Mr. Arrogance, to make sure that United Fruit could have its property. So we have a system, but we need a different system. And the different system has to be based on principles of human dignity in the Universal Declaration, principles of sovereignty, principles of economic rights, because these are not nice things to do. In 1948, all the government said that food is a right, social protection is a right, not a nice thing, not a pleasant thing, a right. That was 73 years ago. The SDGs are nothing more than our generation's attempt to honor the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I come from a country that not only doesn't care about the world's poor, it doesn't even care about its own poor. 1 in 7 Americans is hungry right now. And they don't care. I mean, the poor people care, but one political party, all it cares about is cutting taxes for the rich and filibustering any solution. So we're in a world that's really tough. The private sector's not going to solve this problem. I'm sorry to say to all of the private sector leaders, behave, pay your taxes, follow the rules. That's what you should do. And what the governments should do is the following. They won't, but they should. First, the G20 should become the G21 by inviting systemically the chairperson of the African Union and the African Union to be the 21st country. The European Union is a member of the G20 as the EU. If you add the AU as the 21st for the G21, you add 1.4 billion people to representation at that crucial event. That will change decisively the discussion, because 1.4 billion people are not at the table for finance right now, and they need to be. So my first recommendation is the G21. I love the G20. Add one seat, 1.4 billion people with the AU represented. Second, we need a order of magnitude change of development finance. The rich countries just borrowed $17 trillion for COVID. The poor countries, nothing. Because the rich countries can borrow at 0, and the poor countries pay 5 or 10% coupon rates or have no access at all. So the world exposed its grotesque inequality this past year and a half. Rich countries didn't say, we tighten our belts, why don't you? My country spent $7 trillion of emergency funding, not 1 penny for anybody else, by the way. $7 trillion, it didn't even cross the imagination of the US Congress to include a few crumbs for the rest of the world. But the poor countries cannot borrow. That's what we should have heard from the World Bank. I didn't hear that from the World Bank. I didn't hear real numbers. Real numbers are in trillions right now because the world economy is 100 trillion a year. But we don't talk about real numbers. But my job, all I know in this world is long division. Divide by 100 trillion and then see whether you're talking about something real or not. So that's the second thing. We need massively to increase the lending and borrowing capacity of poor countries at near 0 interest rates like the rich countries have. Then they could get something done. By the way, for COVID vaccines, what we really need is for the United States to sit down with China, with Russia, with the European Union and the UK one day around the table and allocate these vaccines rather than hoarding them. That's all it would take. And then we're going to have national pathways. This is a wonderful idea, but they're going to need financing. And so everything that I've been saying, I know the numbers. That's all I do for 40 years is add up what's missing. You want electricity? It has to be purchased. You want digital access? It has to be purchased. You want safe water irrigation? It has to be purchased. This is what I do for a living, is add up these numbers and then find out that then somebody makes up something and names 1/100th of what's really needed. It's not even hard. By the way, the IMF has done wonderful studies in the last 2 years showing that we have a financing gap of about $400 to $500 billion a year for the basics for the SDGs. They show the gap, but nobody comes up with the number, the solution, which wouldn't be so hard because that's just not a big number. It's 0.5 of 1% of world output. So if we really care, we wouldn't have the G7 saying, we love education, therefore we're going to give $3 billion for education. That's what they said at the summit. But what UNESCO has shown is that you need at least $30 billion a year, minimum. But nobody looks at numbers. They just make up nice check the box. So we need the real numbers of finance to back the national pathways. The final thing is we need the UN as the core and central institution of this world, period. Because this is the only way we're going to have a civilized world, is a strong UN. And it cannot be that the whole UN budget is less than my neighborhood's budget in New York. The UN core budget this year is $3 billion. New York City's budget is $100 billion. And then we say, why don't things work well? Because the rich are hoarding everything. Final point, rather than our 3 billionaires going in space, well, they could go into space and stay there and leave their money behind. That would be one idea. But another idea is we have 2,775 billionaires on the current list. Their combined net worth, 2,700, is $13.1 trillion. Now, I have it on good authority, you don't need more than $1 billion to be comfortable. But they have an excess of $11 trillion over just the $1 billion. So we should be taxing that and having a civilized world. Thank you.
Jeffrey Sachs.
We have to consider the recent evolution and the tragic trajectory of the world food system. It's doing two things at once. In parts of the world, especially those where there are celebrities and rich investors, there's a development of high-tech agriculture dependent on enormous use of water, fossil fuels, plastics, indoor environments, creating the illusion of healthful food without any soil. At the same time, that there's a massive development of a tragic trajectory in the world food system as a whole. It's important to adopt the overview effect in considering problems of food production, growing hunger, and human survival in a complex ecosystem. We need large-scale, long-term planning to match the large-scale, short-term crises because we need this fast. With less than a decade to 2030, the world is not on track to ending world hunger and malnutrition. And in the case of world hunger, we are moving in the wrong direction. These were the words of the UN SOFI report earlier this month, July 2021.